Thank you so much, Sharon, for joining me today. Why don't you start to tell me a little bit about you and the documentary that you just recently created called Let Us Pray?
Okay. Well, thanks for having me on. I have been a filmmaker for 15-ish years. It's a second career for me. I was in marketing advertising before. And then my first project was where I followed 12 girls through high school for all 4 years of their high school experience. It was the year my daughter entered high school was when I started it. And so I filmed with her contemporaries. And then I did a second season of that. And so I've done a lot of things that have been filmed over time. And my company's name is Horizon Productions. So I tend to do a lot of female centric kind of storytelling. And so I've done lots of documentary series that have been on CNN or HBO, National Geographic, and then and most recently the project that I'm very proud of, and I'm very happy that we were able to air it, to film it, to air it, was is called Let Us Pray, which is now streaming on Max. And I was able to follow women from the Independent Fundamental Baptist Church, who have gotten out of the church and who were unfortunately abused by their leaders in the church. And what was really what really got me about this story is that there were so many women and so many offenses and so many cover-ups. And there's a blind eye movement that kind of emerged from this, and it's so apropos because there were so many people, and still are so many people in these churches, that turn a blind eye to the abuse, and then they turn a blind eye to the cover up of that abuse. So it was really an honor and a privilege, and almost like felt like a duty to tell these stories of these women who were coming forward, and men who were coming forward, to talk about what happened to them and what is still going on in these churches.
Yeah, no, it's a crazy thing. My mom grew up in the Church of Nazarene, and it was very fundamentalist there with certain rules. Women were supposed to wear dresses, you couldn't wear pants. And if a man hit on you, it was your fault because you were wearing something that was going to make them want it.
Yeah, the whole victim thing of, like, the victim is not the victim is the one who's at fault, was just mind-blowing to me. And every woman would say the same thing, and they were more used to that in a really sick way than someone like me, and my co-executive producer, Sam Hake, who also we were just blown away by how often that was the case. And then you're not really given any sex education, and all you're told is that don't do this, but then you're told in private, do this for me. um and then you're blamed for that, and the shame that the survivors still carry. It's just it's so um I don't know. It's like I sometimes I it's just too much to handle.
I think when we had Rachel on Survivor Squad, I didn't know her story completely, to be honest. I knew that she was a survivor of sexual assault and the church had something to do with it, but I didn't know the depths of the relationship and the coercion involved in it. And it was done to so many other girls. When you go into a documentary and you're filming stuff, you're starting to work on it, and you're dealing with sensitive subject matter, where do you start to kind of delve into it where it's not going to be offensive to the survivor?
Oh, I mean, that's a great question. Because it is something that we had to be aware of every time we shot. And it's different for different women. And it's also um different in terms of where they are in their process. I mean, there are some women who were just realizing what had happened to them and talking about it. There were some women who have been trying to get somebody to listen to them for 25 years. So there's all kinds of considerations that you have to, be aware of. And I think what's important is really just developing that relationship. And everyone always talks about it in documentary, developing the relationship of trust, but it's true, and it's important. And it's, people say, like, well, what's the trust? Well, the trust is that you are going to really listen, and that you are going to tell that person's story as authentically as possible. And in the process, you're going to also be very sensitive to what they may need. Like, they may not be able to go into the whole story in one sitting. They may need to take breaks. They may need to say, I'm going to say that over again. They may need to say 2 weeks later, that part that I told you about this, I don't really want that in there. And so there's a lot of things that go into building that trust.
I think that's amazing and very victim centric content making because I've been in probably at least five documentaries,
Mm.
and I have not ever had that where they said, except for maybe one documentary where there's telling me, okay, you could take a break, or if this is too much, you could step away. It's more so, oh, you're getting more emotions. Let's lean more into this. Tell me more and more. And then it gets that survivor in such a triggered state where they can't step out of it for a while. Um, how do you know when a survivor might get to that point?
Um, I think it's reading cues, number one, and then also just checking in with them. Like, do you need a break? And telling them right up front when you're starting to do the interview, if you need a break, let me know, because I want to give you that break. It is also interesting because earlier in my career, I was kind of known as someone who could get someone to cry really easily. And in part, that may be true in terms of because I do think I'm really empathic and listen, and people feel comfortable talking. But I also think that there's something magic that happens when a camera's in front of people, where they think this is the truth, and they picture all the people listening to them, and then the floodgates open. But I used to think I thought the cry was like, wow, this is my mark. This is what I'm going to do. And now I've changed that over the years, because I don't think that that's the goal. I don't need to have somebody cry for me to feel like I did a good job, or that they really showed their emotion, because even being on the verge of tears is is raw, and people can feel that. So I don't think that that's as important, and I also don't think that it's not worth it. It's not worth traumatizing someone, um, just to get a good bite.
Yeah, true. And how do you try to pinpoint the points in their stories that are important to tell?
Hmm. Well, that has to do with, like, a lot of, pre-production. So sometimes which is helpful to just, like, you do, either me or a producer um, talks to the survivor, talks to the subject beforehand, and then you get the whole story. And then, like, these are the areas that I'd like you to talk about. So that's one way. The other thing is that you have to build in a lot of time, because there are some people who really do want to they want to tell you the whole story, and it can take 6 hours. So you're gonna have a lot that, I had a series that was 4 episodes, 45 minutes each. So you have 3.5 hours to tell everybody's story. And you do one interview, that's 6 hours and maybe several interviews that are 6 hours, and everything's not gonna get in there. So, but that's also building the trust that I think that some people want to tell, and they need to tell you the entire story, and they want you to listen and to hear it, and it really does help because when you're editing it, you know, when there are certain gaps, you can kind of figure out what gaps are okay and where people can fill in or where that's not necessary. And where, like, I would even say in Let Us Pray, people went very much into detail about their abuse. And a lot of that we didn't use because we didn't need to re-traumatize the survivor when she watched it, and or traumatize people who were, some sort of triggering thing when people watched it for themselves. And it's not necessary, but we would want to tell enough so that people got an idea of what happened.
Yes, and if I'm not mistaken, a lot of these interviews were done in a church setting, right?
Well, they were actually done. I'm glad you asked that because it was really important for us. We wanted to kind of got hooked on this notion of reclaiming your space. And so we worked with each of the subjects and gave them kind of some options of like backgrounds and environments that they could be in, that then they could actually reclaim that space. And we were like intentional about, like, you're going to be in a pew, and then that means that you're going to reclaim that space. And so a church doesn't have to be a place that's painful or scary or something that has power over you. You're going to have power over that space. And there were some women who wanted to do that and some women who didn't want to do it in that space. So we found different spaces. So like we have one woman who a lot of her abuse had to do with being on a school bus, and her abuse was different than some of the other women because she was involved with a teaching situation at a girls boarding school, but a school environment had a lot to do with the abuse that she suffered. And so we did her interview on a bus. And then we did an interview with Amanda Householder, whose parents ran a boarding school, and she and her parents are actually, they're going to be on trial pretty soon with over 100 felony charges. But they had in these boarding schools, and some of the women that we interviewed had experienced this. They had these isolation rooms that were just horrendous, that they would put the girls in and have preachers outside the had preaching like on a cassette player outside the door, and they were in these isolation rooms. So Amanda Householder she was interviewed in an isolation room. And then at the end, and this isn't part of the documentary, we didn't have time to put this in, but like they did something to the space to show that they were reclaiming it. And she kind of ripped the walls off of this, like, indoor outdoor carpet.
I love that so much. I love that you gave survivors their chance to take back their space and also use it as a part of healing.
Yeah, yeah, and that's what we talked about, and we also made sure that we got buy-in from every person that we did, and for the environment that they were going to be in, because of course we wanted them to feel safe and to feel comfortable.
Yes, I love that so much. And not every producer thinks of it. I think the average producer, the director, filmmaker doesn't think of that. So I was very honestly, I'm seeing a change in some true crime content. And you see the good ones, and then you see the ones that are completely going towards the perpetrator and leaning towards that and kind of glorifying that in a sense. But your documentary was very ethical in my opinion. And I just went away walking with like clapping because I was so proud of all those girls. I know Rachel. And so my eyes were bawling the whole time for her. And I thought it was very interesting, even with Amanda's story, how she had to be forced to abuse kids. and
Mhm.
other children. And that's a part of coercive control is the
Mhm.
abusers have such power over you that you have to do things sometimes for you not to get abused.
Yeah, and she was young. I
Yeah.
mean, because and what kind of shocked me about, again and again, I would hear that when people came out with their stories, that they were questioned, like, "Well, why didn't you say something?" And there's so many different answers to that. There's like, "Well, number 1, I did say something and no one listened," or number 2, or I didn't know it was wrong because nobody told me it was wrong, or my life was threatened, or the lives of my family members were threatened. And so there are so many reasons that question of why did you do it when you knew it was wrong is such a bad question.
Yeah, it goes more into the victim blaming that people do, and it's not okay. It's not okay to ask, like, did this happen? Do I really believe this person? And I know there are extreme cases out there where sometimes that happens, so it makes up that story. But the percentage of it happening is slim to none,
Yeah.
you know?
Mhm.
Like most of the time, that story is completely true. I only get people reaching out to me because of my story, and then people I think it also has to do with, like, DID, if you've heard of that a
What is
bit.
that?
Dissociative, identity disorder.
Oh, yes.
I think I get a lot of those people that come towards my story, and then they have some type of trauma, and then they start to create a different persona about my story. I've had that happen a few times, but for majority of the sense, people are telling the truth.
Yeah, I mean, I always kind of go into things with that belief, like this person's telling the truth. And especially when it's a survivor, like I would rather err on the side of believing the victim.
Yes. And how do you make the survivors when they're on set? Like, do you say certain words to them to make them feel supported, or is there like a checklist you go by?
I mean, some of that is just intuitive and also picking the right crew. So like I think that, for example, like who I mentioned, Samantha and I, who really did this together, we both had the same sensibilities about the women, and then we had different relationships with them, and like we would kind of tag team on who was going to do the interview based on who felt that they may have talked to that person more and they may be more comfortable with you. Definitely before we would start filming, we would have, like a crew meeting where we would make certain decisions and also tell people like how we wanted them to interact. Like there were certain people that we would just like production assistants and people who were really not going to get into their story but would hear it. Like, please don't ask them any questions about their story. Like you can ask them where, what they had for breakfast and be nice to them, but we really don't want you to start even saying anything to them about their story because we don't want them to feel like they're on stage with their story. One of the other important things that we made a decision to do was to have a female audio sound recordist all the time so that there were never men trying to put the mics down a woman's shirt. So and because a woman, the audio recordist is always in the room. And so they're listening, they're off, they might be on the side, where you out of earshot, eye shot, but they have their headphones on and they're sitting there and they're hearing everything. And it's not a secret. So we wanted that person to be a woman. And so and it's not always easy to find and hire sound recorders who are female because there are more men who have that position. So but it was very intentional on our part, and we thought that that was really, important to do.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever had a female person to mic me. And I was on the last set I was on that was it was with Jubilee, if you've heard of
Mm,
that. And they had a mental health coordinator on set.
mhm,
They had someone ask, do you want to mic yourself and everything? And I'm the type of person that I'm like, just mic me. I've been on set too much.
mhm, mhm.
But it's really great when you have survivors and they have that consent, they have a female. And I always think back to mics, when you're being mic'd up and everything. I think back to the Jinx.
Oh, yeah.
I'm like, they're hearing everything.
Mhm. Yeah,
Yeah.
we do, we do, we hear when they talk about us.
Are you like hoping to ever record some of that not the talking about you guys, but like hoping to get little sound bites from people when they're mic'd or no?
It depends what kinda in Let Us Pray, no,
Okay.
because there were no, like, wanting any gotcha kinda stuff, and
Yeah.
if they did say anything, which never really happened, we would have asked them for their permission to use that, but yeah, I mean, in some other things, it's possible.
Yeah. Well, I saw a Dateline episode. I don't know if you're familiar with the Sarah Turney case, the Alyssa Turney case, but they interviewed her dad, and the dad's like a prime suspect in the case. And I would have the mic running for him. To just catch anything and everything. And I like how they did his interview, even though I'm not a fan of having perpetrators or someone in suspicion in films,
Mm.
but it is how they went after him was great. As a producer, do you ever want to include the perpetrator to hear, like, to kind of have those moments to go after him a certain way, or do you want to just make it all about the survivors in a sense?
Um, my preference would probably be to just have the survivors. But there were some instances where, we gave some of the perpetrators an opportunity, like the leadership at certain churches, like, we asked them if they wanted to comment on the cover up, but, did not really ask any of the people who were the abusers, and in fact, Ruthie in our 4th episode, when she gets to confront her, rapist in court, um, he got up and spoke and just said such vomit came out of his mouth that we were all, like, disgusted with, asking for the judge to let him off easy because he has a son who's disabled and his parents are watching them and his parents are sick and, like, buddy, I'm sorry you didn't think about all this stuff in your life before, and how sorry he was, um, and now he understands that because he's found God or whatever, found God again, and, we decided to cut all that out. We
Do
just
you
didn't he had no words in our at
Yeah,
the end. We didn't use any, we used all the time for what Ruthie had to say.
I love that. I love that so much. And I feel like you probably think this, but do you think it was a whole load of crack?
What he was saying?
Yes.
Oh, I didn't believe anything that he said. I believed he was trying his best to not be in prison very long and not get the maximum sentence that he got. But I loved when the judge said, like, "I don't know if you could ever be rehabilitated." And we were like, "That's going in."
Yes. Yes. I don't think they can. And I've talked to a lot of psychologists that even have worked with sexual predators. And it seems to be the case that if they haven't done anything, there's a possibility of them getting help for that, without them actually doing the act and stuff. But once they've done the act, I feel like there's no coming back from that.
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine. I mean, but Ruthie nailed it in her victim impact statement, and and talked about how, when she looks into her own daughter's eyes, that she sees that innocence, and that how could he see that innocence in her and decide to take that away?
Yeah, yeah. No, we've chatted with a Larry Nassar survivor, Sarah
Um,
Klein, and when she came on, she was so surprised that it was abuse. But when she had her own child, she thought, "Would I want anyone doing this to my child?" And then she was like, "Wait, no, that was all abuse." And it's when you think of your own child, you think differently about what is right and what is wrong.
Yeah. And that's the other thing with like these statute of limitations laws, that they have no understanding of what it takes for someone to process, realize, acknowledge, and be able to confront abuse. And it can take decades.
Oh,
And
yeah.
so they don't realize that the laws have absolutely no understanding of that.
Yeah. No, well, it's crazy how the brain compartmentalizes the trauma, especially when you're such a young person. And that's the only way that your childlike mind can create reason or reality from this event.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, it's mind-boggling.
Yeah. So, what are some of the ways that you kept in contact with the survivors after you were done with production and now in like post production?
So, it's been really, really wonderful and so rewarding to see the women bonding even more. There were groups of subgroups that who knew each other, but then they all know each other now as one group, and I just feel like that is amazing. They have more support. I mean, they can't have too much support. And also seeing them really use their platform and their voices now. Like Rachel, we were talking about on social media, and she's gained a greater following. And then there have been protests, like in Hammond, Indiana, that April initiated and organized, and then a lot of the women came in for that. They've confronted the leadership at these churches, and there's still more going on, and people are getting interviewed, and there's been a lot of press, and they've embraced it, and it's so rewarding to see people become empowered. And I mean, and that was really our hope.
Yes, I think that you guys took the mission and made a success out of it and really showed it across the map to everyone what it looks like to go through this. I think I told my mom to even watch it because of her experience of growing up in the Church of
Mhm.
Nazarene and having those fundamental values in the church and how that's really cult vibes. And it opens a lot of people's eyes.
Yes.
And you can kind of accept that that was trauma in the church.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah, so much of that.
Yes. Well, I don't want to keep you forever. I have one last question to ask. And for anyone that is wanting to produce their own story, get their story out there, what would you recommend them to do?
You mean like a survivor who wants to
Like
tell their story?
like a survivor or, if anyone is wanting to be a documentary filmmaker.
Oh, um, well, I think what is important to look at is what can you tell? What story can you tell that has not been told? Um, and there are a lot of cult stories that are out there now, a lot of abuse stories, and there are lots of stories that can be differentiated. And so I don't think that, you would have to look at it and say, "Oh, that story's already been told." But I do think you need to look at how is this story how can the story I wanna tell be seen as different than other stories that have been told? That would be number 1, and then making sure you can get the access to those stories, and that's important too, and, like, why now? Why is this time important to tell it, and why are you the person to tell that story? So, I think those are kind of some of the things that are really good questions to ask yourself, and to have good answers to.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And where can we find your documentary to check out? And where can we find you on social media?
Okay. So, you could find the work that I've done on my website, Horizon Productions, and it's HERIZON Productions.com. And then Let Us Pray is now streaming on Max. And, I am on Instagram just with my name, Sharon Liese, SharonLiese, on, Insta and Facebook and on X, I guess we call it now.
Yes, perfect. Thank you so much, Sharon.
Thank you.